Hey guys! So if you didn't watch my last video, I revealed that I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder 1 a couple weeks ago, and I just wanted to make another video talking more about how I got my diagnosis and all the events that led up to me realizing that I was autistic. And I also said in my last video that it never occurred to me that I could be autistic, and that's not totally true. I kind of just misspoke there. There's been a few points through my life where the word autism kind of popped into my brain as something that could possibly be wrong with me, and it's been kind of mentioned to me a couple times too, just offhand, like comments about how I can't make eye contact or stuff like that. But it was never super seriously suggested to me that I might be on the spectrum. I did go in for some testing when I was maybe nine years old, because I had a few facial tics where I would blink really hard and I would cough without needing to actually cough. I'd just be like stuff like that. So my parents took me to the hospital to get me tested with a neurologist, I guess. I think the diagnosis they were thinking I might have is Tourette syndrome, which I didn't end up having. But I didn't, I guess, come off as autistic to them, so it wasn't something that they flagged with my parents. So throughout my life, it seemed like autism could be a diagnosis for me, but it was never something I seriously considered until about, I'd say last fall, maybe September, October. I watched a YouTube video about women with autism, and it was the first thing that opened my eyes to the fact that autistic women present differently than autistic men, and that all the symptoms sounded a lot like me. You know, everything like having a hard time making friends, having a hard time maintaining relationships, having super specific and intense special interests, you know, all that kind of stuff, and it just made me realize this could be me. So almost immediately I really wanted to figure it out. I wanted to research it as much as possible and just kind of figure out on my own whether this was a diagnosis I would think that I had. So I watched a ton of YouTube videos about it. Autism became one of my special interests. It was something I didn't want to think about anything else. I watched a bunch of videos from Sara Mills, Shayna, who was Runaway Germ on YouTube, Invisible Eye, basically any woman on YouTube who talked about having Asperger's or autism. I was watching their videos as much as possible because I wanted to get a diagnosis, but I'd heard that it was really expensive to get the testing done, and I wanted to be as sure as possible before I went and pursued a diagnosis to see if it was something that was gonna be an actual diagnosis for me, so I didn't waste $3,000 or however much it costs. So I did a ton of research on my own and came to the conclusion that the symptoms do match me fairly well. And there were a lot of times I'd go back and forth because everyone in my life that I only told pretty much my family and the people I was closest to, like only one or two other people. And each time I told someone, they were like, I don't think you're autistic. And even though I knew, you know, they probably also had that stereotypical view of autism, it was still kind of like, maybe they're right, maybe I'm not autistic. I don't want to go waste time and money on a diagnosis that I won't even get. So I definitely went back and forth on it. I was like, oh, I'm definitely autistic. And then I'd be like, oh, wait, I'm definitely not. Like, that's dumb. I'm totally not. But eventually it got to the point where I was like, I need an answer. I need to know. And so I started doing research on specialists in my area, people who dealt with adults with autism, because the challenge for me was finding someone who specialized in autism in all ages instead of just children. So I had to search around a little bit for that, and I wanted to make sure I found someone who wasn't gonna misdiagnose me with some other disorder because I'm a woman. At first I didn't find anyone, and I kind of abandoned the whole process. I was just like, It's fine. I don't need a diagnosis. I'm just gonna like live my life, whatever. And then I came back to it a month or two later, and I had kind of like reignited the fire to get diagnosed, and I managed to find someone in my area who specialized in autism of all types, I guess. And so I sent an email at first because I hate talking on the phone and I didn't want to call and make an appointment, and no one emailed me back because what doctor makes an appointment over email? No one. So eventually I worked up the courage to call, and I set up an appointment in December, and I went in, and I was assuming that they were going to tell me that I would have to go through some sort of testing. I'd also heard that, you know, a therapist can kind of just diagnose you by having some sessions and talking to you, and that's what I was definitely hoping for, but I was assuming that I was going to have to go through extensive testing. So I went in, and she kind of just sat me down and talked to me, and she just basically interviewed me and asked me about all of the diagnostic criteria for an ASD diagnosis. Because I'd done so much research, I knew a lot of the terminology and I knew a lot of the symptoms, and I didn't want to sway the diagnosis in any direction. I didn't want to force it one way or the other. So anytime I was like using the research I had done, I made sure to let her know that I had done a lot of research and that I don't want to sway the results. So she basically just listened to me. I had written down on all of the examples of autistic traits that I could think of that I'd had throughout my whole life. I had really examined myself over the few months that it took me to get to the therapist. So she basically just listened to everything I had to say and, you know, gave me input as well. She, of course, didn't give away whether or not she was going to diagnose me. But then at the end, she gave me some self-tests to take home and fill out. It was like 65 questions or something like that. I went home, filled those out, brought them back like as soon as possible. It was Christmas, so I knew that I wasn't going to get a result right away, so I sat and waited patiently for 2 weeks, and then I wasn't patient anymore, and I called, and they told me I had to wait for my insurance to come through, and I was like, okay, I'll wait. And then I waited a month, and then nothing happened, and then I had to leave the country, and then I came back, and I waited another couple of weeks, and then I was like, okay, I need an answer. So I called them and I said, please tell me if I'm autistic. So they set up an appointment with me finally, and April 10th? I don't know. 2 Wednesdays ago, I went back in and she went over the results with me, gave me this thing that says you're autistic, and that was that. So for a lot of people, it's a lot harder. I don't know how much weight this would hold if I were to try and register as like disabled or whatever. You might need to go through like extensive neurological testing in order to get benefits or anything like that. But for my purposes, this was perfect. I just wanted to know. I wanted to get the opinion of a licensed psychologist, which she's a PhD, so I figure that's pretty good. It was kind of perfect. So if you have experienced any of the symptoms I've talked about, or if you've done any research on your own and you think that you match up with a lot of the autistic traits and you're on the fence, you're like, maybe I should get tested, I really recommend it if you can find a great specialist who will give you an accurate diagnosis. I recommend looking around and trying to find the best person for you. But it's great. It's a great relief to know more about yourself in any way, and especially in a way that affects your brain and your personality and everything so much. If you're in the US, I'll leave a link down below where I found my psychologist. I think it was just Psychology Today, and it's just a really good source. You can filter out people by your like insurance type to make sure that they accept your insurance, and you can click which disorders or whatever that you want them to specialize in, and it'll give you a list of people in your area that you can go see and talk to. And Yeah, I definitely recommend it. Anyway, this was the topic that most people wanted me to talk about. This is what I got. Pretty much every question I've gotten was about my diagnosis, so I wanted to make this video for you guys. Let me know if there's anything else you guys want to see from me, and I'll see you next time.